Coming up on Arirang News, in a further sign of the economy recovering, South Korea's industrial production rose in June by 1.6% from a year earlier. Retail sales are up too, but this doesn't yet reflect the pandemic's fourth wave. At the Olympics, South Korean sports shooter Kim Min-jung wins silver, her country's first medal in shooting at these games, while Korean archer An San has just won her third gold medal in the women's individual. And the South Korean authorities announced the vaccine schedule for people as young as 18, essentially the rest of the adult population. They can start reserving their shots in mid-August. It's 5 p.m. here in Seoul. Thank you for joining us on Arirang News. I'm Devin Whiting. Data from June appear to show the South Korean economy continuing to recover from the pandemic. But because that data is from last month, it doesn't yet reflect the fourth wave of the pandemic and the new distancing restrictions. Jang Tae-hyun has the details.
South Korea's overall industrial output in June went up 1.6% on month, thanks in part to a strong performance by the semiconductor industry. The increase was the biggest seen in 4 months. According to Statistics Korea on Friday, production also increased in the manufacturing and service sectors. Communications and broadcasting equipment sector fell almost 9%. However, production remains strong in the semiconductor and auto industries, jumping 8.6% and 6.4% respectively. Looking at the service sector, production in running water, sewage and waste edged down 1.3%. But this sector managed a positive figure in terms of production due to strengthening finance business. And consumption rebounded, up 1.4% as people stocked up on new clothes for the hot summer months. However, June's report predates the impact of the fourth wave of the pandemic, so the outlook remains far from certain.
We have plenty of experience dealing with COVID-19, so the negative impact won't be as pronounced. That's what we are expecting. That being said, uncertainty remains and we have to keep an eye on the situation.
Officials say they'll monitor the economic situation as it unfolds to try and cushion the most detrimental impacts of the pandemic. Jang Tae-hyun, Arirang News.
And the U.S. economy grew in the second quarter by 6.5%, which would normally be an extraordinarily high figure, but the market consensus was more like 8.5%. What held it back was supply chain issues. Growth was driven, as usual, by consumer spending, which rose by almost 12%. Ji-young has the details.
The U.S. economy grew during the April to June period, showing signs of erasing its pandemic-era decline. According to the U.S. Commerce Department on Thursday, the country's gross domestic product, which is a measure of all goods and services, accelerated at an annualized rate of 6.5% in the second quarter. This is slight improvement from the 6.3% gain during the first quarter, and it also marked the strongest of any quarter since 2003. This was thanks to large stimulus, vaccination, and the reopening of businesses. Consumer spending, the main fuel of the U.S. economy, which accounts for 70% of economic activity, was strong last quarter, increasing at an 11.8% annual rate. However, many experts say economic output grew at a rather disappointing rate. While the total size of the economy has now surpassed the pre-pandemic level for the first time since the outbreak, it fell well below a Dow Jones estimate of 8.4% growth on an annualized basis. Also, economists surveyed by Bloomberg forecasted economic output to increase at a rate of 8.5% through the second quarter. The weakest components of the second quarter report were bottlenecks in production and firms not being able to keep merchandise stocked. The labor market in particular has struggled to get back to normal, also slowing U.S. economic expansion. The Labor Department said in a separate report on Thursday that some 400,000 initial claims of unemployment benefits were filed at the end of last week. This is almost twice the normal level prior to the pandemic. Ji-young, Arirang News.
Time now for an in-depth look at the market news on this Friday, and for that I'm joined on the line by Mr. Daniel Yu, global strategist at Yuanta Securities. Mr. Yu, good afternoon. Good to have you back on.
Good afternoon.
Well, stocks on Wall Street closed higher overnight, though U.S. GDP came in below expectations. There were other factors, though, like a pickup in production, good earnings from some companies, although not Amazon for one. What's the story in the global markets?
Yes, if you look at the overall economic growth numbers, it came in much below expectation. It showed about annualized 6.5% on quarter of second quarter versus market forecast of about 8.5%. Clearly, there's some areas that put some doubts about the economic recoveries, particularly on the labor market, that the labor market recovery is not as strong as hoped. In any case, though, personal consumption expenditures, namely services, are all growing at around 12% territories. Yes, and economy is improving. And as you said, the overall earnings numbers coming from various other companies are showing a fairly good numbers. Of course, there are uncertainty about this market where Amazon is trading at significantly lower on the aftermarket because of not the earnings of second quarter, but looking into the future, there's guidance were coming in much below the expectations, and that's causing the current uncertainties. But in any case, overall earnings numbers for the second quarters are showing very strong, and that's why U.S. market did okay yesterday. It did go up by about 0.4% for Dow Jones, and S&P was up about 0.4%, and NASDAQ was up about 0.1%, and small cap was up by about 0.7%. But in any case, though, this week so far has been fairly volatile week, where there's been concern about the China impact of regulatory environment, and then recently with the economic growth numbers coming in below expectation, uncertainty is definitely lingering, and that has resulted into most of the other markets showing declining trend today, post the futures market showing quite a weakness due to some of these economic numbers coming through from U.S.
Well, ahead of that, Korean stocks closed lower today, a fairly significant decline. Only a very few sectors making gains today. Retail investors, though, apparently seeing a chance to buy. Tell us about the domestic market.
Yes, Korean market did quite a bit of weak performance. Kospi was down by 1.2%. Kosdaq was also down by 1.2%. The large cap also was down by about 1.3%. Clearly, this is due to foreign investors continue to be a net seller. They sold about 664 billion won worth of equities, and institutions sold about 573 billion, while the only net buyer was the retail investors, buying 1.2 trillion won worth of equities. Now, so South Korea's government and finance minister, Vice Finance Minister Lee, is saying that Fed meetings are not going to be impacting that significantly for Korea, but continuously there's uncertainty regarding the COVID-19 Delta variant to the domestic consumption numbers. So therefore, government will be watching this very keenly, and market volatility might be something that is installed for the time being. But if you look at the overall market, Korean market since the COVID-19, every month it showed positive performance for all last 13 months or so. Now, this is the only month that the number of June that showed quite a bit of July that showed a declining YOY. Or I guess the quarter-on-quarter or month-on-month. So these numbers are saying that we needed some kind of breather for Korean market. Korean market did very well from the bottom to top, where it has risen more than 100% plus. It needed some corrections for the time being because of the global market showing some corrections. However, though, if you look at it on a longer-term basis, we think the fundamental for Korea is very strong right now. There's the uncertainty about the dollars and U.S. exchange rate to the Korean won, and Korean won has been continued to be a depreciating environment, and that resulted into foreign net selling so far. However, though, we think that Korean won is at the high end of the trading range, where it hit well above 1150 territories. We think that it's not going to depreciate further, so therefore, after this July month, we think that foreign investors are not going to be the major net seller, and therefore, we are looking at probably possibility of recovery happening in August based on the very strong economy numbers and very strong earnings growth number.
Well, we'll continue to watch that, of course. And final question, Mr. Yu, look at some more data here in Korea. Production rising again last month, notably in semiconductors, retail sales up too. Still hanging over all of that is the fourth wave of the pandemic. Help us go through this data from June.
Sure. If you look at the industrial productions and retail sales, and all these numbers are showing that reasonable growth numbers. If you look at, first of all, the retail sales, it has grew by about 1.6% year on year in June of 2021. That's a slightly less than a very strong number of 3.1% jump that we saw in the previous month. But in any case, it has been a fifth straight month of gains on retail trade. Now, in terms of the industrial output production side, the growth number came in at very strong. It grew by 11.9% year on year in June of 2021, following the revised number of 14.9% gain in the previous month. In any case, there is continuation of two-digit growth numbers happening on the industrial production numbers. As for the construction output, it actually decreased by 3.1% from a year earlier in June of 2021, following the revised 6.9% gain in the previous month. Obviously, there is uncertainty regarding the real estate market, and that has resulted into construction output being relatively less. In any case, if you look at export numbers, domestic consumption numbers, retail sales numbers, all indicating that Korea is in a good position, that the economy is growing at a fairly reasonable pace. If you look at the economic growth numbers in quarter of June, it grew by about 0.7% on quarter basis, and that seems to be continued reasonably good number. Of course, there's uncertainty regarding what's happening to the COVID-19 variant that might result into weaker domestic consumption numbers. However, though, export numbers should be remaining very strong, with the U.S. consumption retail sales numbers being strong, as well as Chinese retail sales numbers being strong.
All right, Mr. Yu, we'll have to leave it there for today. Thank you, as always, for your insights. We always appreciate it, and have a great weekend.
Thank you. You too.
And just in from the Tokyo Olympics, South Korean archer An San has won the triple crown of Olympic archery. With her win just minutes ago, An is taking home gold in the women's archery individual event, beating the Russian archer Elena Osipova in a shoot-off to claim South Korea's fifth gold medal of Tokyo 2020, and 4 of the 5 have come from archery alone. An San won 3 of those, including her mixed and women's team titles. The archery team is now just 1 medal away from sweeping all 5 events. Kim Min-jung's aiming for gold in the men's individual contest slated for tomorrow. Also this afternoon in Tokyo, South Korean sports shooter Kim Min-jung has won the silver medal in the women's 25-meter pistol event. In Friday's final, the 24-year-old finished second to the Russian shooter Vitalina Batsarashkina. It was a nail-biter that finished in a shoot-off with only 1 hit for Kim and 4 for her rival. This was South Korea's first medal in shooting at this Olympics. In the men's shooting, legend Jin Jong-oh, who was aiming to win his 5th career gold medal, did not make the podium in either of his events. And for the first time in 25 years, a South Korean athlete has reached the final of the high jump. Woo Sang-hyuk cleared 2.8 meters to ensure that he has a spot in Sunday's final. He failed to make that cut at the 2016 Rio Olympics, but he says he worked hard so he could do better in Japan. Until now, the best Olympic result for a South Korean high jumper was Lee Jin-taek, who finished 8th in 1996. Another South Korean track and field star is pole vaulter Kim Min-jung, who holds the national record. His event starts Saturday morning with the final later that night. And with the track and field part of the games underway, we'll find out this weekend who succeeds Usain Bolt as the fastest man on the planet. The 100-meter finals are on Sunday. A major draw for Korean audiences this Olympics has been fencing. It's impressive to see the power and speed of the fencers as they try and maneuver past their opponents' defenses. Of course, fencing developed first as a skill for soldiers and would be deadly if it weren't for the special equipment they use. Our Lee Kyung-eun went to find out just how it is that the fencers stay safe.
I'm at a fencing club to answer all the questions we've been having. Can we see through the mask? And how thick is the suit? And does it actually hurt when hit by the sword? But before going into all that, let's be clear. The blade is actually very sharp. It's like a real knife, and I can easily cut bread or a peach.
That's why fencers wear the protective gear that covers the full body. The first part is the mask, which is made of strong, tightly woven metal mesh. It can withstand an incredible force, and there's a bib made from bulletproof material to protect the neck.
So I have a mask here. Let me put it on. Well, I can definitely see through, and it feels like looking through a mosquito net. And it's not that heavy, but it's 100% penetration proof.
Now, onto the protective suit. It's made from fabric that's tougher than steel and can withstand up to 80 kilograms of pressure before being punctured.
So I'm fully kitted out in the uniform from head to toe. It's very thick and tough, so it's kind of hard to move. And another thing is that it's getting really hot.
Now, let's find out if it still hurts even with all this gear on. Each type of fencing has a different target zone. Foil, only the front or back torso. Saber, the whole upper body. Epee, anywhere on the body.
So it was my first time being hit by fencing sword. Well, it doesn't hurt, but I could still feel the pressure. And I knew I was safe, but I was still very scared. All I can say is respect to all the athletes out there. Lee Kyung-eun, Arirang News.
In other news, South Korea today again reported more than 1,700 new coronavirus cases. The Delta variant is now consistently accounting for more than half of them, which is a concern not only because it's more contagious, but also because people are traveling for summer vacation. Outside the Seoul area, most of the country is still not at the highest level of distancing, but that could change as the authorities monitor the situation over the next week. Kim Min-jung has the latest.
South Korea on Friday reported an additional 1,710 new cases of COVID-19. The daily number has remained above 1,000 for over 3 weeks. Health authorities say one of the main causes of the recent spike is the spread of the highly transmissible Delta variant.
These days, we have more than 50% of all found viruses in Korea proved to be a Delta variant. I'm expecting Delta variant to be the most dominant variant in this country as well. Maybe by the end of August or mid-August, we'll see more than 80% of Delta variant prevalent in our country.
All but 48 of Friday's cases were locally transmitted, with the capital region accounting for 67% of the infections. Non-capital regions have been reporting over 500 cases for 10 days in a row. With cluster infections increasing outside the Greater Seoul area, the government says they will review a number of measures after monitoring the trend until next week.
Recently, we have implemented social distancing level 3 and banned drinking on beaches at night to prevent a balloon effect in non-capital regions. After monitoring the situation until next week, we will discuss again with ministries, local governments, as well as experts.
The government has asked the public to refrain from traveling this weekend over fears of growing cluster infections at major attractions and beaches during the summer vacation season. South Korea's Education Minister Ryu Hyun-jin also said Friday that the ministry is aiming to increase the amount of in-person classes nationwide for the second semester. This comes as the average school attendance rate reached 70% in the first semester of this year, while last year only 50% attended schools in person. Kim Min-jung, Arirang News.
South Korea has announced the vaccination schedule for essentially the rest of the country's adult population. Adults younger than 50 can start signing up for their shots in the second week of August. They'll actually start getting them on August 26th. The authorities say they do have enough doses to follow through on these plans in the coming months. In August, South Korea is due to take delivery of more than 10 million doses from Moderna. Shin Yeon has the latest.
South Korea has announced its latest COVID-19 vaccination plans for some 17 million people aged 18 to 49. In a briefing on Friday, the KDCA said those under 50 can receive either the Pfizer or Moderna shot from August 26th until September 30th. And to resolve ongoing problems seen from previous rollouts like the online vaccine reservation system crashing, the KDCA pledged to implement a rotation system. People will be divided into 10 groups and allowed to reserve their vaccine only on designated days, based on the last digit of their birth date. Those whose birth date ends in a 9 can book their vaccines first on August 9th, followed by those whose birth date ends in a 0, and so on.
Vaccine reservations will be from August 9th to the 18th, and those eligible will be divided into 10 groups so that vaccines can be distributed more equally and conveniently.
Ahead of the main rollout, local governments will first give some 2 million people from this age group priority shots. This includes the disabled, homeless, and those who work at high-risk facilities such as bars, restaurants, and PC rooms. And any elderly people who haven't yet received shots can continue reserving their shots. In particular, people aged 75 or older who are at higher risk of severe infection can receive vaccinations without a separate booking period. Authorities say enough vaccines will arrive in time for 70% of the population to get at least one shot by September and herd immunity to be reached by November. Some 10 million Moderna doses, including those originally set for July but delayed due to production issues, will be supplied in August. 1.3 million doses will first arrive by next Friday or Saturday. So far, South Korea has given out first jabs to more than 36% of the population. More than 7 million people have been fully vaccinated. Shin Yeon, Arirang News.
Earlier this week, South and North Korea restored their communication lines. And now, South Korea's unification ministry has laid out plans to do more to revitalize inter-Korean relations and talks between the two sides. For one thing, Seoul is going to immediately resume approvals of humanitarian aid to the North via NGOs. Kim Da-mi has the details.
Seoul's Unification Ministry on Friday authorized the sending of 2 rounds of humanitarian aid to Pyeongyang provided by non-governmental organizations. This followed a press conference by the Unification Minister earlier in the day, where he laid out plans to further revive inter-Korean talks.
There have been continuous requests from non-profit organizations. The decision comes in consideration of the North's situation, including its urgent need for health and nutritional products.
Aid had been suspended for 10 months following the killing of a South Korean government official by North Korea on the West Sea border last September. There are no details yet on the timing or types of aid to be sent, but it's highly likely, experts say, that Pyongyang will accept the aid.
One of the reasons for restoring communication channels with the South is to reopen humanitarian support on the non-governmental level, so it's highly likely that the regime will accept the aid.
The North may also believe that humanitarian aid would help move inter-Korean relations forward, especially in the prolonged pandemic. In fact, the North last year saw its worst economic growth in 23 years since it went through a famine in the mid-90s amid an economic crisis. According to a high-ranking ministry official, there are also signs of the North resuming trade with China by sea, which could be a way for the regime to get aid from the South too. Also, Minister Yi said Seoul suggested to Pyeongyang on Thursday that they discuss ways to set up a virtual conference system for talks, a suggestion the North has acknowledged. The ministry is currently drafting a list of nearly 30 agenda items on which to consult with the North, including the provision of vaccines and the North's destruction last year of the Inter-Korean Liaison Office. Regarding the South Korea-U.S. joint military drill set for mid-August, the ministry official said the drills will need to be delayed, pointing to the worsening virus situation and saying it's an appropriate time to work with Washington to engage with the North. Kim Da-mi, Arirang News.
And in Major League Baseball, the Toronto Blue Jays ace pitcher Ryu Hyun-jin earned his 10th win of the season in a blowout victory over the Boston Red Sox. He pitched 6 scoreless innings on Thursday at Fenway Park in Boston, holding the Red Sox to just 2 hits while striking out 5. The Blue Jays beat the Red Sox 13-1, and Ryu lowered his ERA from 3.44 to 3.26. This is the 4th time that the South Korean pitcher has achieved double-digit wins in a single season since he entered the big leagues in 2013. And that does it for this newscast. Thank you for watching.